Yes, well, welcome. And our next speaker is Sowmya. We worked on your first name, not your last name, Vajjala?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, excellent. And who will be talking on teaching NLP outside linguistics and computer science classrooms. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone. Well, good morning, evening, and good night also for some of you. So I'm Sowmya and I'm from National Research Council, Canada. And today I'm going to talk about some of my experiences with teaching NLP outside computer science and linguistics classrooms. So what does this talk about? We all by now know that NLP is taught and used in many areas of research and several practical applications. And we've all been talking about these experiences over the past one day. So in my paper, I discuss some of the challenges we face when we teach NLP to these diverse groups, especially when we don't have an ecosystem of related courses, when we don't have an established, say, NLP program. And also try to identify some issues that go beyond classroom instruction, but are also useful for teaching. So this talk is going to focus on a subset of the paper's contents. Before going into that, let me just give a quick overview of my teaching experience. So I would like to categorize my teaching experience into four types. The undergrad general is a non-technical course intended to give an overview of language technologies, language and computers, open for all disciplines. It had typically freshmen and sophomore students from all sorts of backgrounds, mathematics, biology, various kinds of engineering backgrounds, everything. The undergrad focused one was an introductory text mining kind of course taught as a part of it was one of the electives in a data science curriculum for LAS majors. This also had undergrad students from many different kinds of backgrounds, including linguistics and computer science, but also had, at one point, we had English, journalism, political science, biology, and mathematics, along with computer science, all in one classroom. This was taught twice. So the third one is, third cell is, I taught two courses of that kind, which are probably the most similar to the most common kind of NLP courses. It consisted of, these consisted of classrooms of linguistics and computer science students, a statistical NLP course, and one course was just focused on what do you do when you don't have large data sets for NLP. The final cell is taught for, it's also an introductory level, there are two introductory level courses, but they were taught to specific graduate groups, applied linguists and economists. So let me talk about some of the challenges I faced while teaching all these kinds of courses. So they were taught over a period of 5 years in 3 different universities, one in US and 2 in Germany. So the first kind of challenge I would like to talk about is in terms of student and faculty goals versus course contents. So in my experience, when I spoke to these students, when I asked the students why are they taking this course, they typically wanted to just gain some quick actionable insights that they can use right away. When I say right away, it can be in some research project they're working on, or when they're applying for jobs, they want to show some NLP project in their resume and things like that. As an instructor, I had 2 distinct goals. Like I said, all these courses, almost all the courses except the courses taught to linguistics and computer science students, they did not have an ecosystem of related courses. So my first goal was to make sure that they have enough programming background and have some idea of good practices of programming so that they won't completely end up in a place where they don't know what to do. And after that, my second goal was to give enough overview of linguistics, NLP, and math so that the students get the foundation right while also gain some practical insights. So if they want to go from this course and they don't have another course there, I tried to make sure that they'll have enough background to do some self-learning. So for this, what worked, in my opinion, was connecting each concept taught in the class to a practical use case that is relevant to the students. So when I say relevant, sometimes it is some kind of software application they are using. Sometimes it's talking about how people are using NLP in their own research, how people are using that particular NLP concept in their own research, or things like that. And I did a lot of group activities in the class, sometimes discussing research papers or evaluating different kind, like the, say, take a tool like Duolingo and then talk about how it is working, where it is failing, and things like that. And just to introduce students to some kind of linguistic problem solving, I had NACLO exercises as just some icebreaker activities in almost, I think in every course I taught. And in terms of programming, I asked students to review each other's code and discuss on Moodle or Canvas. And I think there were one or two classes where they were discussing their code, just projecting it onto the screen and explaining why they made a particular decision. And then students discussed on what are the other ways of doing it. And I also always had some additional ungraded exercises and reading materials for those who need more challenging stuff. So these are the things I thought worked in terms of student and faculty goals. However, I still don't know what's the best way to get the right balance among all this different kind of contents required in the course, and how to connect to real world or the disciplinary research of the students better. And there is no way to measure how the students are, whether the students are ready to self-learn with the foundation they get in these courses. I think that can only be done long term. Clearly, I know, I mean, now that I spoke to some of the students I taught 5 years ago who are still doing some kind of programming NLP, I know that some of it worked, but I think it needs to be more concretized in some way to be useful to others. So the second kind of challenge I encountered was about textbooks and graded resources. So I think we have several books covering basics for various audiences. Like there's a recent book on NLP for social scientists, and there was a book I followed some time back on text mining for students of literature. Or we have advanced NLP textbooks like Jurafsky and Martin, or Jacob Eisenstein's book, which he spoke about yesterday. Or we have a lot of materials focusing on, say, doing NLP with PyTorch or deep learning with Python or these kind of things. But clearly, there is a need for graded resources. So in a lot of my conversations with the students, the one constant problem we ran into was, say, Jurafsky and Martin is too advanced for them. But now that they have some basics, probably the NLTK book is not enough for them. But what is there in between? I mean, there are plenty of tutorials and blog posts and everything online, but it's also difficult to sift through them and get something that they want. The other thing we thought was we need textbooks that are more inclusive of the needs of various student motivations. So some people wanted to start with corporate data collection and annotation, or use some kind of Snorkel-like tools for doing data labeling. Some people wanted to understand where these approaches work and where these fail. Or, I want to be a software engineer, so what are the practical considerations I should know when doing NLP beyond experimentation? Or ethics, which was discussed also in yesterday's sessions. So I think our textbooks should, I think that it's not possible to have a comprehensive textbook which covers everything of everything, but maybe there should be something of everything. Okay, the third challenge I would like to talk about is about teaching diverse audience. So I felt when teaching other audience, people outside linguistics and computer science, we as instructors should also have some basic knowledge of the target disciplines. What seemed to work for me was I spoke to a lot of instructors from other disciplines to understand their needs, what they expect students to know from these kind of courses. And I also spent some time reading research articles from other disciplines just to understand their methods and the use of NLP in particular in those disciplines. What may work, I got this suggestion when I was discussing this issue with somebody, that co-teaching these courses with faculty from other departments may be a good idea, but it seemed a little bit like idealistic to me. Maybe there are definitely more challenges to do this in practice, including planning logistics, and I don't know how course burden is distributed between professors and things like that. So those are the challenges more specific to teaching of the course itself. But when we teach these courses, our aim is that the students then use these NLP methods in their own work, in their own disciplines. However, in our in-class discussions, students raised some topics related to NLP that they wanted to use, but are understudied in NLP research, in my opinion. And while working in interdisciplinary collaborations, I realized our methods don't exactly go well with some of the methods used in other disciplines. And then I heard complaints from other people using NLP tools and teaching with them, like corpus linguists. I'll talk about them in the next slide. So I felt, I mean, these are not exactly related to teaching, but I think they feed back into teaching later. So I wanted to talk about them. So the first one, so I say just teaching because I think these are like undervalued. Like when I talk about teaching challenges, then people sometimes are talking to me like, why don't you just do research? I mean, you're not a like faculty member. Why do you talk about these things? So I have just in quotes there. So one issue beyond teaching that frequently came up in our classes was about causality and NLP model predictions. So in some disciplines, they care about drawing some kind of causal inference from these kind of predictive models, whereas we typically don't do that. That's more recent work on this kind of thing, but I don't think there is anything established that can readily feed into teaching curricula and things like that. Then text as secondary data, this frequently came up in my class with academic students. So they want to use NLP and a lot of textual data, but only as secondary source of information. Their primary source of information still remains economics data sets. So we did not figure out a way to somehow combine both of them without giving, without making NLP as the primary source of their model. The discussion about construct validity of feature representations, thinking about what are these features measuring, are they measuring what they're supposed to measure? This came up a lot when I was teaching applied linguistics students, because a lot of them were into language testing and some kind of educational measurement, like studying tools for computer-assisted language learning, teaching, evaluation. And because some of these are high stakes, they care very much about this construct validity, and we don't talk that much about what our feature representations are doing. We only talk about how they are useful for what model, for doing what prediction. So that's also something I thought is somewhat challenging to discuss in these classrooms. And finally, developing user-friendly tools with better documentation. So I was giving a talk in a corpus linguistics conference last year, and the whole of the entire Q&A session focused on this particular topic. Why are NLP tools so bad that we can't use them? Of course, we don't have, like as researchers, enough incentive to build tools in a way that other people can use. But I thought now that NLP's scope is increasing much beyond NLP and software applications, maybe this is some area to focus on that is not exactly teaching, but is useful for teaching other people. So that's it. And I have two primary concluding thoughts. I think we should develop an evolving collection of resources for teaching various audiences, which the workshop organizers already started doing. And I think we should start paying attention to these, not exactly teaching only challenges, if we want to increase the use of NLP methods outside our own field. And of course, more teaching NLP events should happen in future. Yeah, that's it from my end. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you. That was terrific. That's a virtual round of virtual applause here. And well, I mean, I'll just as a comment, I related to so much that you described in this paper. So many of the challenges are things that I have experienced and struggled with, and I'm sure that many of us probably have that feeling. Are there questions? Raised hands, perhaps, and let me maybe start. You mentioned a couple of things that I think are echoing other themes. One is how we don't really talk about or teach annotation, and yet so many of our projects live and die by annotation. And I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about how could we introduce this, or what would be a reasonable approach to take with that?
So what I tried to do was just to have some data sets, like very short, like, I don't know, 100 sentences, and then asking students to form into groups and label them into two categories, like spam or not spam or something like that. And then we convened back and then discussed how much disagreement exists between individuals as well as groups who did the same data set. And we also tried to do some data sheets for data sets kind of exercises in the class, just taking some popular data sets from LDC and looking at them. And I don't know if there is a way to, I mean, there can be an entire course just talking about building the course, building the corpus. But what I tried to do basically was to just introduce students to issues in preparing a corpus. Like, what do you do when you don't have a corpus? Can you just scroll from the web? What if you crawl from the web? Are there any issues to be concerned about? I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have a clear answer. I did a lot of small exercises related to corpus creation and exploration, but I don't think I have anything concrete about what is the solution.
Yeah. No, it's a hard problem, but
also I don't teach full time now, so it's difficult for me to, like, I teach only when someone asks me to do that. So it's also difficult for me to have some kind of plan to have this like broadly.
Yeah, well, and that's where your point, I think, about resources and materials is so important, because there are a lot of people who do that. I mean, they teach a class maybe as an adjunct once a year, once every 2 years, and to expect such a person to build from the ground up, you know, an appropriate course is just not realistic. And let's see, I'm looking to see if there are other questions. Or just raise your hand here, and I guess what I'll throw in here, and it's not something I've worked with personally, but I found it very thought-provoking, this idea of working with people or students where the text is kind of secondary data, like in economics, they want their tables of statistics, and yet NLP is somehow important to them. In what ways are they thinking of that NLP can be applied, or and how does that work, and what seems to be the issues there in those cases where the text is secondary?
So I think they haven't found out any solution for that yet. So from what I understood when I was talking to these economic students, from what I understood, they're still looking at NLP as some kind of a fancy method. And there's no established standard on how exactly should it be integrated with economics data sets. In the papers we discussed, almost everything either had some kind of sentiment classification or some kind of topic models. And those were not exactly combined with economics kind of data sets, but they tried to link the results from the predictions from the models somehow to draw causal inference with the other data set they have. They did not do any combination of primary and secondary sources yet. I think it's relatively new for them. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't talk to those professors, of course. Like, there was one professor in my classroom, but he also seemed to say that it's not something everybody is doing already yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also seems like an area where generation could be kind of interesting. I mean, here's my big table of economics, statistics. Now write a report. Yeah. And this is where my ignorance of economics shows. I have no idea if that's a realistic goal or not.
I talked about summarization with them, and they thought they never encountered such a case in the papers that they read.
Interesting. Well, this has been terrific. And again, I would encourage anyone who hasn't already read the paper, please do so. I think if you've taught NLP in any setting, you'll find a lot to relate to there. And so let's thank our speaker again, and
thank you very much.
Thank you.